Yes, I can. I mean, I think the first thing is to relax a little bit. I think that sometimes we take wine a little bit too seriously. It's just wine. So we don't need to get too, like I said, too caught up in feeling that, we need to understand Burgundy or Bordeaux or something. It's simply not true. I think, taste some things, taste some wine, see if you like it. There's no point drinking anything that you don't like. So fundamentally, I have a kind of deep appreciation of taste, smell, and texture. I know I catch my daughter laughing at me or rolling her eyes at me whenever I stop to smell a leaf, or I smell everything really, smell a leaf or smell a glass of water. I think that people don't really have, or people kind of forget in this age where we have a lot of visual and aural stimulation, that our second senses, taste and smell, are equally important and equally enriching of our lives. I don't forget that. I know how smell and taste really enhance my life when I'm thinking about what I'm tasting, eating, smelling, tasting, and never more so than we're dealing with that most aromatic and complex of foodstuffs, wine. Well, I've always had an interest in food, I think, and taste. That really was started, I think, because of my relationship with my grandmother. She was a cook by training, and although I didn't live with her, I lived with my mother, who was a good cook as well. She'll never forgive me if I don't say that. But my granny was professionally trained, so when I used to go and stay with her at weekends or sometimes in holidays, she would always make all her own bread and all her own jam and chutneys and would bake every day. And yeah, so I always really appreciated not only her skill as a cook and that exposure to really nice flavors that gave me, but also my granny and grandpa really believed in the ceremony of food. So even though people joke about the English not having the kind of food or culinary sophistication of some of our continental neighbors, or like the people in Taiwan, where the food culture here is very famous. Actually, there are parts of England, or there are certain pockets of England where food is serious, and my granny and grandpa were examples of that. So, for example, every morning when I would come down for breakfast, we would have silver cutlery, linen tablecloths, like a 3-course breakfast, and then we would have a similar kind of lunch, all again very formally presented. Not formal in terms of what we would be like at breakfast. We would talk to each other and have a nice time, enjoy each other's conversation. But that's what would happen through the course of the day. Food was important, and I think that my deep appreciation of food really came from seeing them. The next kind of phase in my life, I suppose, as I began to get a little bit older, I'm talking about moving into my early adolescence, was that my favourite auntie and uncle in London were big foodies as well. So they were never shy about taking me to either diverse or very good restaurants across London, because they also recognised that I had a similar love for taste as they did. So that was hugely beneficial for my understanding of kind of even cultural understanding, because I remember eating, I think, Peking duck for the first time when I was about 6 in London in Chinatown, and that might seem to some people in Taiwan or other parts of East Asia of like, oh, it mustn't have been very good. I don't know how good it was. I know that I really liked it. And I hadn't eaten a food like that before, and I didn't think, oh, this is strange or weird. I just thought, this is great. So it's no surprise to me that by the time I got into my early adulthood, that because food is simply an extension, because wine is simply an extension of food, that naturally wine began to become more interesting to me as I worked my way through my 20s. And then that really manifested itself or became vocationally important when I was on holiday. I don't know if this was when I decided, but I was on holiday in France with my wife and young daughter. I think my daughter was 1, so probably in 2001, somewhere on there. And I just, again, had been, going to local restaurants, drinking just inexpensive but nice wine. And I think I had a conversation with my wife, Krista, and said, maybe I should go into wine. And within a year of that conversation, I'd given up my job as a social worker. I used to work in child protection. I'd done my first formal course in wine. I did a level 3 in the WSET level 3 course, night class in Leeds in West Yorkshire, where I was working at the time. And then I made my first phone call in wine, rang up a winemaker who made wine at one of England's biggest wineries, and kind of begged him for a job, and he gave me one. And another 4 or 5 months after that, we'd sold everything and moved to France on the basis that I needed more experience. So that's really how I kind of entered the wine trade. There was no single moment, no single epiphany that kind of, sparked something in me which said that I now must go into wine. I think it started when I was very young with my granny, and worked its way through to a point where I got to about 30 years of age, where I just thought, dealing in taste and flavor and smell, and therefore wine, is something that I really want to do. Well, I think my temptation is to say throughout my whole life I've just been very, very lucky. And my luck extends to, thankfully, having a wife who seems to think I'm okay. And she has always supported me hugely in whatever I've desired to do. I hope I've done the same. And so when I said that, I think her words were, okay. That was about as complicated as it got. So when I eventually did make that phone call to a winemaker called Martin Falk, I remember her being in the kitchen. I was in the kitchen making the call. She was listening. And then I came off that and said, he said I can have the job and he'll let me stay in his house, and even though he'd never met me and all of this kind of stuff. Krista was just happy. And when I was working at Three Choirs, which was this winery in the UK, and then I said to Krista, I think we now need to move to France, even though she had a proper job. She was the head of English at a high school. She again was, and we had a 1-year-old daughter. She was like, okay, well, yeah, it sounds like an adventure. Let's go and do that. So that's what we did. Yeah, a cellar hand is really somebody who just does all the jobs that nobody else wants to do. So you just spend a lot of time feeling cold, because usually especially in England or in northern France or Germany or somewhere like that, at the time of harvest, which will be September, October, even into November, we're entering winter or late autumn, and it's not very warm. And in most wineries, you often find that you have the doors open, because when fermentations start, there's a lot of carbon dioxide produced. And if you trap carbon dioxide, ultimately it kills you, because it shoves the oxygen out of the way, and you inhale that and you die, you asphyxiate. So you're basically working in whatever it feels the temperature is outside all day, usually wearing just a boiler suit and some wellies, some Wellingtons, and you end up digging out tanks. It's a bit more romantic if you're in the Mediterranean, I'll say that. But if you're in the north, if you're in the south of England or northern France, it's not quite so romantic. So you're digging out tanks, so when fermentations are finished, somebody's got to climb into the tank to dig out all of the skins that are in there, remove all the grapes from the tanks. You're cleaning out presses. In England, you might often have to chaptalize, which means add a little bit of sugar to the juice to bring it up a little bit, so we end up with a wine with a little bit more alcohol. So basically giving the yeast a little bit more food to eat by enriching it with sugar. So you're just doing all of those fairly basic jobs. There's nothing very sophisticated about it, but it's a good introduction to see whether you really want to work in wine, because it's not a very glamorous job. And hopefully in doing that you impress the winemaker or whoever it is you're trying to impress enough that they start giving you some slightly more interesting jobs. Of course. So when I qualified, or when I got my letters in 2016, yes, you're absolutely right. I was the first resident MW in Taiwan. So just to take that one point, just to make it very clear, I know obviously I'm Ingwaran, but the way that the Institute works, the Institute of Masters of Wine, is that wherever you are plying your trade, wherever you are working at a given time, that wherever your country of residence is, that's where you are based. And as it's a professional qualification, the idea is, because they list where all the MWs in the world are on their website, it's not about where you're born or what language you speak, it's where are you working. And I was working in Taiwan. And so obviously I was very proud to be the first Master of Wine in Taiwan. It's a great honor, and but it's that's just the way it works. So just to also say that at the moment, for example, there are 28 different countries around the world which have Masters of Wine in them, and of the student body, all of the students who are trying to become Masters of Wine, we've got students in more than 40 different countries. So it's becoming an increasingly kind of global qualification, which can only be good for the Institute and can only be good for the wine industry in general, as far as I'm concerned. Having high quality, hopefully high quality people doing whatever Masters of Wine do, which can be anything from winemaking, farming, being a journalist, a presenter, a teacher, a writer, whatever. There's lots of things, lots of MWs doing all sorts of different things in the world of wine. In terms of the process from sort of chronologically from the beginning to the end, if I talk about my own experience, well, I'd been thinking about becoming a Master of Wine, or trying to become a Master of Wine, for a couple of years when I was still living in England. So probably from around 2010, yeah, that sounds about right. And I'd looked at the website and saw the questions and just felt that they were maybe too challenging. It looked like too much hard work. So I decided, to kind of put it off. And then I really decided that I wanted to have a go and attempt to do it in 2012. And as it happens, I was in the process, for a number of reasons, I was in the process of selling my business there, which was an importing and distribution business. And my wife also, Krista, also had the opportunity to move to Taiwan and eventually take up a position as the principal of Taipei European School. So it was just this kind of happy coincidence that I ended up in Taiwan. We moved here. I'd applied. You have to apply to get on the course. The application process requires you to do a sort of almost like a written exercise, like an essay or two. I think maybe one essay, and also do some tasting notes as well. You also have to you have to be a professional in the wine industry. You can't be an amateur anymore. They used to allow that. They don't anymore. So if you don't work in the wine trade, you cannot apply to be a master to get on the course. So you have to have worked in the wine trade for a minimum of 3 years, and you have to have somebody senior within the wine industry recommend you, not necessarily another MW, because obviously if you worked in Taiwan, there are no MWs here. So it just have to be someone senior within the Taiwanese wine trade, probably, who would recommend you for the course. And then if you're successful in getting onto the course, which obviously I was, then you start studying. And just to say, when I arrived in Taiwan, I was quite scared for a while. In fact, when I first met my interviewer, Emily, today, we were in class, and I think maybe when we met, I was being introduced to you as a student on the MW course, and I think I actually only got accepted about 2 weeks later. So I was sweating quite a lot, just in case I was never accepted, and then nobody would ever talk to me again, because I would have just been telling a big fat lie. But as it happened, I was accepted, and then you pursue the course of study. And the course of study really is a self-study course. You only attend a 1-week seminar per year, and maybe a couple of course days where you get taught by other MWs just in some of the finer points of tasting, and also maybe in essay writing. So it's a course of self-study, and therefore, and because it starts all the way from, the establishment of a vineyard, so in other words, farming, and the syllabus covers everything up to, the commercialization of wine, winemaking, kind of philosophy associated with wine. So, is wine more art than science? Is wine bad for your health? Discuss, and you've got an hour and a half to write an essay on it. It really does cover a huge range of pretty much everything that you could think of that could possibly be wine related. So there's a lot of stuff to learn. So when it comes to the examination, you have 21, when you first sit the exam, you have 21 hours of exams in 4 days. And that's broken down into 5 theoretical papers where you have to write essays, which cover the subjects I just mentioned. And then you also have 3 practical papers, or what some people would call tasting papers, where you have to taste 36 wines and assess their place of origin, the variety or varieties that they've been made from, their commercial appeal, the winemaking that was used to produce them, and most importantly, in my opinion, their quality level. So that's the process. I was in a very fortunate position when I started, when I moved to Taiwan, because not only was my wife working, and therefore she was getting paid well, but I'd also sold my business, so I also had some money because I'd sold my business. So for the first time in my adult life, I could afford to work part-time. And so for those first 2 years, I worked part-time, and that meant that I could do a lot of self-study. So I was probably on average, I'm talking about like every day of the year, I was probably doing 4 hours of study every single day for the first 2 years, or the first year and a half anyway. And what that enabled me to do was to pass the theory part of the exam first time. I failed the practical part, the tasting part, and so I had to wait another year to resit just the practical part, and then thankfully I passed. And then you have a third part of the exam, which is you have to do a research paper. And so I did my research paper, which I really enjoyed doing actually, because it's a detailed piece of work in an area that you're particularly interested in. And so for me, that was very much about kind of global warming or climate change. So I did a paper on how the climate has been changing in the Barossa Valley in South Australia, and how farmers are now, or growers of grapes, are trying to deal with that change in terms of managing the vineyard, etc., etc. Is there anything else that I want to say about the process? I think that's it. So in terms of the cost, if you're very clever and you can pass it in 3 years, I'd passed in 4 years, which is still pretty quick. But if you pass in 3 years, usually there's only 1, 2, 3 people per year who pass everything first time, because it is very difficult. But of those who do, in terms of the examination fees, the course fees, So no, actually, let me change that. In terms of the course fees, you'll end up spending the equivalent of 420,000 Taiwanese dollars. And actually, if you just take it from at that point, I think that's not very much money. It's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money. In the sense that to do an undergraduate degree in the UK, I don't know what it costs to do an undergraduate degree in Taiwan, but 1 year of tuition fees is somewhere between £9,000 and £10,000, which is almost that cost that I've just mentioned for 3 years. So if my daughter, for example, goes to university in the UK just to do a Bachelor of Arts or Sciences, she reads an English degree or a biology degree, somebody's going to have to pay £9,000 or £10,000 per year just for her tuition, never mind her accommodation and living expenses and all of that. So this is cheaper, much cheaper than doing an undergraduate degree, which obviously thousands and thousands of people do every year, tens of thousands of people do every year in the UK. Where the cost escalates is, of course, that most people don't take 3 years. Most people don't take 4 years. Most people take 5 or 6 or even 7 years to do it. And most people don't do it at all because they never finish the course. And therefore, it can be much more expensive. And also, we also have to factor in that if you really want to be a master of wine or have any real credibility in being labelled in that way, then you do have to have visited a few places and you do need to have tasted some wine. And wine, as we all know, living in Taiwan, is not the cheapest product in the world. And if you want to go and visit, maybe Australia or New Zealand or France or the Americas from Taiwan, then you're going to have to pay for your transport as well. So I'm not suggesting that you need to go everywhere in the world to pass the Master of Wine. You clearly do not need to do that. But I did very skillfully, through the 4 years that I was doing the course, make sure that wherever we went on holiday, there was always a vineyard nearby, so I could go and speak to somebody, or talk to a winemaker or a grower, or somebody involved in the commercialization of wine, so that I could get another viewpoint or another piece of evidence that would help build up my, the kind of breadth and depth of my knowledge, because that's very important. I am a big believer. I have no doubt. We all know, as an ex-social worker, I know that I know something about the way that the brain develops as a child, and it is a remarkable thing in terms of that growth and speed of development is something we never match. We cannot match as adults. Okay, so when people talk about learning certain complex things like languages or maybe mathematical things, it's one of the reasons why we have child prodigies. It's why, if you've got 3 or 4 languages under your belt by the time you're 20, that's going to set you in very good stead, because it is going to be harder, I think, for you to learn something as complex as a language in your late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever. However, like many things in life, for example, like putting on weight as we get older, people talk about, that's a slowing of your metabolism and all of those kind of things. All of that's a load of rubbish, let's be honest. What it's really about is that we get lazier. And I think that, or we're more busy doing something else, you could argue. If you want to learn, if you want to continue to learn, if you are curious, then I'm a big believer in that as long as you keep on using your brain, it will continue to work. In the same way that if you use your body, if you continue to train or to go to the gym or run or whatever it is that you do, you will continue to stay relatively thin, surprisingly. If you do nothing and eat a lot, you will get bigger. And so I think it's the same thing with one's brain. Of course, I found it difficult, but I'm very interested in the subject. I really wanted to do it. Nobody was forcing me to do it. No company was paying my fees. I was paying my fees. So I was kind of driven to, study hard. And if you're really interested in a subject and you're reading about things you're interested in, it doesn't feel like work a lot of the time. It feels like, well, it's a pleasure. So the answer is no. It was, after all that, the answer is no. It wasn't difficult, really. When it came to preparing for the examinations, that was very difficult. And you have some dark moments doing the Master of Wine, there is no doubt. I've seen lots of grown people crying who are MW students because they've been at a seminar and they've sat a paper, as a test, and they've failed miserably. And it hurts when you're 30 or 40 or 50 and somebody keeps on telling you, or you realize that actually this is really hard and maybe you're not very good at it. It hurts, and people say that you need to leave your ego by the door when you go into the MW process or program. And I think that's a very wise thing to do, because your ego is going to take a severe beating. Yes, really simply, firstly we have to start with the fundamental, and the fundamental is that we all know really what most wine books look like. You don't need to do very much to be innovative in wine. So whilst I have huge respect for, I have a lot of wine books on my bookshelf, obviously, and whilst I really enjoy reading many of them and have huge respect for the authors that have written them, most of them follow a similar format. They're text heavy, and then in between some of that text, we have some photographs and maybe the odd diagram, and that's fine. But I just feel that sometimes it would be nice to have a slightly different approach, and so. Just before I actually started our blog Sniff, which I started in conjunction with my illustrator friend Michael O'Neill, who did all the illustrations in the book. I was very keen to make sure that blog wasn't simply text and a few photographs. So, and the reason for that was because I wanted to make it feel just a little bit kind of fresh, maybe a little bit more fresh. I kind of think a little bit more inclusive. I'm not naive. I recognize the fact that if I write a wine blog, most people who are going to read it, if anybody's going to read it, are going to be people who are interested in wine. I'm not expecting to bring masses of new people to that site or to engage, thousands of people who've never even thought about wine before. And like I said, I'm not so naive as to think, or so arrogant as to think that would happen. But I do believe that we do paint wine too often in a way which suggests that it's in some way superior to other beverages, or that if you understand wine, you're a kind of sophisticated intellectual, whatever. Most of that's crap. We can't go on talking about wine in that way. Is wine the best beverage in the world? Well, I believe so. We also know that Taiwan has the second best beverage in the world in tea. That is a fact as well. Anybody who thinks it's coffee, they're wrong. It's tea. So, but when it comes to wine, even though wine can be complex in terms of the number of things you can smell or taste or feel in the mouth, that doesn't mean that it needs to be in some way exclusive. Of course, it is exclusive sometimes in terms of its price. If you're at the absolute top in terms of rarity or quality level for something, just like you would if it was a bit of gold or tea. You'd think of the price that you can pay for the very best high mountain oolong, or pu'er tea. You can pay huge amounts of money, but you don't need to drink that tea or that wine to appreciate tea or to appreciate wine. And so the whole ethos behind the book was just to try and make wine a little bit friendlier, just to be a little bit more welcoming. I think that's always one of the reasons why I wanted to have this character who we call Sniff. So let's grab this book for a second. The character Sniff in the book, or on our blog initially, because although he may just be, in a sense, a little, he's talking with my voice, obviously, but I don't think of him as being a version of me. He's somebody else. I didn't want to have pictures of me drinking wine, smelling wine, it's been done before. I think what this does is it almost adds a kind of narrative or a sense of narrative, because you have this little figure holding your hand, pulling you around France. And for me, that just means that it's, a little bit more friendly. Yes, exactly. It's actually one of the things that any subject, any book any book about a particular subject, I think runs the risk of being boring. Also, wine is not food in the sense, if I wrote a cookery book or a book about food, if you look at the pictures of food, you might think, oh, I really like mushrooms or beef or whatever. And you can go and buy some mushrooms and beef and make maybe some of the food that I've just tasted in France or whatever. You can't do that with wine. You have to, it's not as tactile a thing. You can't go and engage with it in quite the same way. You can't put your own stamp on it. You buy it, you pour it, you drink it. So the necessity to make the book readable, to make it in some ways a little bit more like I said, a kind of travel companion, was important. I'm very lucky in that my wife is by training is an English teacher. So when I used to hand her, 1,000 words to read or whatever and tell me what she thought, I'm handing her those 1,000 words knowing that she's, much more grammatically skilled than I am. And also that she likes wine, like hopefully many of you do. She likes wine, but she doesn't really know very much about it. And she's not that interested. And that's absolutely fine. Why should she be? She knows what she wants to drink, i.e. if I pour her a glass and she likes it, she wants to drink it. And if she doesn't like it, she doesn't want to drink it. And that's all Krista is interested in. She lives with a master of wine. Why does she need to know any more? But what I really needed to hear from Krista when she was reading through my stuff was when she got to the end, did it make her want to have a glass of wine? And did she have a smile on her face? And if she did, to both of those kind of questions, then I had written something that I deemed to be successful, relevant, valid, worthwhile, however you want to describe it, because I was engaging somebody who had no real interest in what I was writing about. So in other words, the way that I was writing was hopefully as important as about the actual subject, which ultimately is a glass of wine or something. So I really did try, both Michael and I have tried really hard to make sure that whole feel of the book is like that, is like it's in no way patronizing. We deal within the subject properly, but that it is, just, I've used the word before, but kind of inclusive, I suppose. That's very simple because that is the most important thing about wine. Ultimately, there's nothing worse, is there, than somebody who thinks they have knowledge or even has knowledge. So I sometimes think I have it and sometimes also do have it. And there's nothing worse than somebody like me talking down to you, telling you, oh, right, before you drink that glass of wine, let me tell you all about it. The estate was, formed in 1763. Who gives a shit, really? Who cares? What's the point is what's in the glass Nice. Do you like it? Okay, so you like it. Right, that's the place to start. If you don't like it, who wants to know anything more about it? If you do like it, then maybe, just maybe, you might be interested why it tastes like it does. Not in the whole history of the last 400 years about the establishment of the estate and which king said that, X, Y, and Z could happen and where they traded it with, you might not be interested in that bit. Some people, I would be, but I don't assume that anybody else should be. What you might be interested in is it smells of this, it has this level of acidity, or it's very brisk, it's very crisp, it's very fresh. I can smell some vanilla, and it's also really good. Why do I feel like this about this wine? Why do I feel emotionally engaged with this wine? And all I tried to do through my writing is to work backwards, saying, well, this is what I thought this particular wine tasted or smelled like, and then what does that mean? So why does it smell of those things? Is it to do with the winemaker's intention? Is it to do with the climate? Is it to do with the weather in a particular vintage? Is it to do maybe even occasionally with soil? Is it to do with a variety or the varieties that the grapes have been made with? And to talk about that in a way which wasn't just very dry, if informative, but hopefully engaging and meaningful, and so that you can relate. You can just kind of have those moments where whenever I'm reading anything, I want to go to myself, if I'm reading something which is meant to be informative, I want to hear myself either audibly or in my mind go, oh, that's why, okay. And that's kind of it, really. It's not a book for somebody who is studying the Master of Wine. It's not that kind of book. It's a book for people who like wine or who would like to know a little bit more about wine. That's an excellent question. And really, I suppose my job is to, and I've got to tell you, it's an absolute pleasure working with Michael, but he is like the nicest, easiest man to work with, nicest person I've ever worked with. He is so amenable, so easy, so, in 3.5 years, I don't think we haven't had one crossword, not one. About once a month I might say, I'm not sure about that image, just like one little image in a book or something. And maybe once every 2 months he might ask me about a particular sentence. And that is literally it. So I write what I write. I'm always obviously thinking, I know that it's going to be illustrated, so it'd be disingenuous of me if I didn't use certain imagery, thinking in my mind, Michael will be able to do something with these images that I'm creating using words. And I trust Michael implicitly, and therefore he surprises me every time I open his email with the latest illustrations for a particular glass. Always. But there's also always a few images that I think I kind of led him down a certain path thinking he might use that image. And when it's relevant or he agrees, that's what he does. So it's a two-way thing. I'm always thinking about those images in my own mind. Sometimes Michael recreates them as I thought they might be, and other times they're completely his own, completely his own idea. And certainly every time he does those, they're completely his own interpretation of whatever I have written, because I never, ever, ever tell him what to draw, ever, not ever. And he never tells me what to write. Yes, I can. I think the first thing is to relax a little bit. I think that sometimes we take wine a little bit too seriously. It's just wine. So we don't need to get too caught up in feeling that, we need to understand Burgundy or Bordeaux or something. It's simply not true. I think, taste some things, taste some wine, see if you like it. There's no point drinking anything that you don't like. I don't like chou tofu. It doesn't matter where I go in the world, I'm never going to enjoy eating chou tofu. I love most Taiwanese food, but I don't want to eat that one. There's no point a chou tofu expert standing in front of me and giving me lots of different kinds and saying, well, you know, if you understand it more, you'll appreciate it more. No, I won't. I'm never going to like it. Leave it alone. So if you taste a few wines and they really do nothing for you, move on. Drink tea, drink beer, drink coffee, whatever it is, and don't worry about it. If you do feel that your interest or curiosity is sparked, then I think for me, you know, the joy and pleasure I get from being a part of a tasting group, as I was with a few people and ex-students of mine from teaching level 3 in Taiwan. You know, the joy of just simply buying one bottle and everybody in your group buying one bottle. You meet together at somebody's house or a restaurant. You've only spent money on one bottle, but you get to drink or taste 6. Let's say if there are 6 friends, 6 of you. That's just a really nice way to get to try a few things without spending huge amounts of money. You don't need to take out a new mortgage. There's no need to fall out with your wife or husband because you're spending too much money. You can still gain quite a lot of experience and tasting experience in particular by doing something like that. Also, of course, you can sign up to do an introductory wine course. I've never taught the WSET levels 1 and 2, and there are other courses out there, of course. But I know in Taiwan we have those offered by Taiwan Wine Academy here. And you know, why? For the cost, I don't know how much it costs exactly, but I don't think it's too expensive for something like level 1. And you're going to be introduced to many of the major, what we would call noble or famous grape varieties in those introductory classes. So again, you know, you'll meet new people, you'll hopefully try wines that will either pique your interest or demonstrate to you that wine is not for you. And again, you'll either move forward and carry on tasting and your life will be enriched, as I mentioned in the very first thing that I said in this interview about you know, your sense of smell, your appreciation of what you can taste, thinking about those things. It's the thinking about smell and taste rather than just simply allowing it to happen to you, which is the great joy for me. You know, it's I suppose it's a bit like learning to play a musical instrument. You know, the ability to kind of understand what's happening rather than just hearing it. You're actually listening, truly listening. And I think that if you're other than that, so other than from starting a class, making a tasting group with your friends, we've got lots of good bars and restaurants in Taiwan where you can go and increasingly taste wines by the glass. You don't even have to buy a bottle. So maybe you're going to have to spend 200, 250, 300 NT per glass to try, you know, many different glasses.